the Xbox. It would soon become Microsoft's home brand console. Originally made from Windows 2000 parts, the Xbox surprised gamers out there with its very high processing power and able to play games straight to the disc, and even had online capabilities via Xbox Live. And this was actually the first console I ever owned. About a decade ago. So I'm here today to show off my Xbox collection. First up on our list is Event Rising. Now, Event Rising is one of those games where it was hyped to hell and back when it first came out, and it never really lived up to its promises. I remember there was a trailer playing at movie theaters for this game back in 2005 when it was first released. As you can tell from the advertisement here, you could apparently win $1 million. Race to save humanity, apparently it says at the back of the box. Foundations of the universe are about to be violently shaken apart. A timeless prophecy threatens the order of galactic civilization, and one legendary race stands at the epicenter. Apparently this game had a story written by Orson Scott Card. It was originally meant to be a trilogy, but because of the poor sales and critical reception of this first title, the trilogy never came to be. I thought it was an alright game for what it was. The music was fantastic, and the soundtrack is literally one of the best in gaming history, in my opinion. I recommend giving the soundtrack a listen. It was the best thing that came out of the game, bar none. Next up on our list is Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. A lot like Diablo, in which in case it's like a dungeon crawler. You defeat enemies, you find other weapons and items. This game has multiplayer, and it's actually really fun with a second person. There's like different varieties of gameplays. You can play as a dwarf, a mage, a warrior, and playing multiplayer is where it's at for this. Next up is Conker Reloaded. This is one of the games that the company called Rareware made, after they split with Nintendo. Conker Reloaded is a remastered version of the original War game, and it's actually very hard to find, but it is a lot of fun to play. Moving right along, we have Crash Bandicoot Wrath of Cortex. Now, after the first 3 Crash Bandicoot games were made, they started getting a different developer by the name of Traveler's Tales, who are now responsible for the Lego games. So, one of their earlier efforts was the Crash Bandicoot games, Wrath of Cortex and Twinsanity. Wrath of Cortex is very similar to the older games, but isn't as polished enough as the older games. I would love to see a built from the ground up like they did with the Insane trilogy. Next up on our list is Crazy Taxi 3. It's like Crazy Taxi 1 and 2, but that's okay. If you are a fan of Crazy Taxi 1 or 2, you would definitely like Crazy Taxi 3. The thing about Crazy Taxi 3 that's makes it stand out of the other 2 games is the ability of having multiple customers at once that you have to take to their destinations. Now, the one thing that makes it all the more difficult is the time limit. The time limit is very, very fast-paced, and it's a very fast-paced game. In fact, it's probably the fastest-paced of the 3 games. And I would love to see a Crazy Taxi 4 in the near future, if possible. Next up, we have Crimson Skies. Now, this game is actually going to be one of the first games to be featured in the Xbox Original Backwards Compatibility program for the Xbox One. And what a good choice it is, too. Crimson Skies is one of the best exclusives on the original Xbox, if you can find it. And it's pretty cheap. If you like flying games and shooting down planes, this is a game for you. And the multiplayer is also fantastic as well. There's many different modes and levels, and I highly recommend Crimson Skies. Dead or Alive Ultimate. This is a compilation of the first 2 Dead or Alive games. If you're into fighting games, with some great fighting mechanics. You will definitely be a fan of the first two Dead or Alive games. Dead or Alive 2 is my personal favorite of this compilation. Not my all-time favorite. We'll get to that one in a second. But the multiplayer is fantastic, and if you have access to Dead or Alive 3, you have access to some goodies as well. Speaking of Dead or Alive 3, this is Dead or Alive 3 right here. This is my personal favorite of the Dead or Alive franchise. It's more the same, but I feel like it was tuned and refined in all the right places to deserve the buy. They have a good roster of characters and a good amount of stages. The multiplayer is as fun as ever. Dead to Rights is an action game where you play as Jack Slate, a cop on the beat of Grand City. Unaware that his next call is about to change his life, what he discovers will send him on a downward spiral into a labyrinth of corruption, betrayal, and crime. There's a huge amount of explosions in this game. In fact, this game is absolutely crazy and over the top of how it is. It is a one-player game. It takes you on to 15 chapters. A good price. I recommend checking it out. Here we have Deus Ex Invisible War. This is the sequel to the original Deus Ex before Human Revolution. And this was met with mixed reviews from the die-hard fanbase because of how much they dumbed down the game for it to be console-ified, if you know what I mean. The game was first developed with home consoles, particularly the Xbox, in mind, and because of that, it suffered greatly. But that's not to say that the game does not have any merits of its own. On the contrary, I find it to be a very polished and well-made action game. It's not Deus Ex, but then again, it's not a bad game either. You kind of have to look at it for what it is. Doom 3. Now, Doom 3 takes on a different formula than the other games do. Before Doom 3, we had Doom 1 and 2, and if you played Doom 1 and 2, you know how they are. Doom 3 is a departure of the first two games, as if it incorporates survival horror elements into it, which was a big popular trend at the time. The reviews were fully positive, but I noticed in retrospective, people don't really care much for Doom 3 as much anymore. I have a soft spot for the game, mostly because I love what it was trying to do at the time, and I always go back and play it, particularly on Halloween. Speaking of which, coming up soon, we will have some Halloween live streams over at my Twitch channel. The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Now, The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind was my first entry into the Elder Scrolls games, and because of that, I hold this game with a lot of respect. I eventually played Morrowind, then went to play Oblivion, then went back to play the older games, to eventually Skyrim. Morrowind was probably the game that was probably one of my first RPGs I played on a console. I'm familiar with like the isometric games like Fallout, but I have never once played one of these. The amount of openness to them, and the amount of variety, and the amount of content in this game. And if you have the Game of the Year edition, that is even more content for you. I highly recommend Morrowind a lot. So nowadays, I recommend going to play it on PC, but I originally first played it on the Xbox, and because of that, I recommend picking it up if you somehow don't have a PC strong enough, or if you're a collector like me. I might as well show off these two since they're basically both the same. Fable and Fable. Now, Fable was a very hyped game for the time, but I never really came around when it was hyped up to hell and back. I came when the hype was dived down, and I found it for very cheap. I didn't really understand the hate for the game at first until I realized how hyped it was, and then I realized, oh, that explains it. No game lives up to their hype. That is definitely the truth when it comes to the first Fable game. But I wasn't around until the hype came for this game. I kind of came after that, and I found it was around the time when Fable 2 was released, actually. So I kind of saw it, found it looked interesting, I picked it up, and it became one of my favorite games on the system. I can't really understand why, but I believe it was nostalgia. I've had so many memories that the negatives don't matter to me. I still like to play it. It's one of those games I keep coming back to. In fact, I have it on the. It's probably one of the games I have the most copies of. I have Fable Lost Chapters on the PC as well. I also got the Anniversary Edition on 360 and PC. So it's all over the place. I also have a box copy as well on the PC. Now, I don't really have an actual box for this, so please excuse the crudeness of this box. But this is Gena Onimusha. This is a re-release of Onimusha 1 from the PS2 to the original Xbox. It runs smoother. The load times are definitely a lot more faster. And if you like action games with tank controls, this is the game for you. This was made by Capcom, who also made Resident Evil and Devil May Cry, so you kind of know what you're kind of getting into. Kinda. Godzilla Save the Earth is a fighting game with Godzilla monsters. We're talking Jet Jaguar, Godzilla, Mothra, Space Godzilla. Like, there's a whole ton of them, and you get to fight in many locations such as Tokyo, San Francisco, New York, Seattle, you name it. It has fantastic multiplayer, and it even had online multiplayer for the time. And this is definitely a game I highly recommend picking up for entertainment value alone. It's very rough around the edges, though, but that's not to say you shouldn't give it a shot. If you can find it for a good price, I highly recommend Godzilla Save the Earth. Moving right along with another horror game, we have Grabbed by the Ghoulies. Now, Grabbed by the Ghoulies was the first game that Rare made for the original Xbox when they were bought out by Microsoft. It was originally going to be developed for the GameCube, but because they were bought out, the development was switched to the Xbox. It has its fair share of problems, but if you like some humorous action with, for some reason, punching is on the right stick of the controller, I can never figure that. Too human did. But the graphics are colorful, the soundtrack is ambient, and it has that Rare sense of humor. If you like Rare games, you would probably be disappointed, but if you're into something different, I say give it a shot. Grand Theft Auto is a very huge name for the PS2, so when I saw this box set of the I saw this box set of of 3 Vice City and San Andreas for a good price, I thought I would check them out. They run a heck of a lot better than they did on the PlayStation 2 due to the bigger horsepower that the Xbox had compared to the PlayStation 2. That's just a fact. When you look up the specifications compared to the Xbox to the PlayStation 2, there is a huge amount of difference to it. My favorite out of the bunch would have to be 3, but I do like myself some Vice City. I was never a fan of San Andreas, but it's growing on me the more I go back to play it. If you are a fan of the Grand Theft Auto series and you haven't played these yet, well, 1, what the heck is wrong with you? And 2, go buy them. They're great on any system. Next up is Gun Valkyrie. It is an action game by Sega and a launch title. It got overlooked as a launch title, but it's actually a really fun shoot 'em and slash 'em game. It is one heck of a thrill ride, and it's a very fun game. My copy doesn't seem to want to load for some reason. I need to get a new copy. But I highly recommend playing this. The one thing I feel like it would have been a missed opportunity is split-screen multiplayer. I feel like Gun Valkyrie needs a sequel. Now let's get on to the big game that was advertised for the Xbox, and that is Halo. What can I say about Halo that hasn't been said before? It is a first-person shooter, and it's one of the best ever. The amount of detail for the time on a home console was absolutely spectacular, and at the time, the multiplayer was one of the hugest things ever. 4-player split screen and even system link. LAN parties were changed forever the moment this game hit the scene. There was a PC copy released a year later after the Xbox version. It added new maps, but those never came to be until the Master Chief Collection came and brought them through. If you've never ever played Halo before, now is your chance. You can find it absolutely everywhere. It's on the Xbox, the PC, if you want to hunt down a PC copy, or you can go and get the Anniversary Collection for the Xbox 360, or the Master Chief Collection, which comes with both the Master Chief, both comes with the Anniversary Collection and the original back to back. You can swap the graphic styles and the sound effects, and it's a fun time. The pistols are amazing in this, and it's games where I was just hooked when I first got it. Of course, you can't have Halo 1 without Halo 2. This is the collector's edition copy with the steelbook case. Halo 2, I like Halo 2. It's really well done. It's very polished. The campaign is definitely a very fun campaign. Probably not the best campaign out of the whole franchise, and it leaves on a cliffhanger that would not get resolved until the third installment. But the multiplayer was huge at the time, and for split screen, it was still a joy to play. Gameplay was tuned in all the right places to be deserved of a second installment. I recommend getting Halo 1 and 2. Both of these are absolutely fantastic, and not getting them would be stupid. Unless you're not a fan of first-person shooters. Which I know there's a lot of people who are not a fan of first-person shooters. For you RPG fans, we have Jade Empire. It is an epic martial arts adventure, and it is definitely one of the best for the console. It was made by BioWare, who were responsible for Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and later went on to make the Mass Effect series and the Dragon Age series. Jade Empire was one of their earlier efforts, and you can tell that it was one heck of an effort and one of the best on the system. It was also released on the PC as well. If you never played Jade Empire, I recommend giving it a try. With a great battle system. Jet Set Radio Future is probably one of my favorite games. You can't really say it's a skating game or a platformer, but it has a lot to it and a lot of variety and style that you can't help but loving it anyway. Lead a posse of street-smart skaters through multiple adventures as you reclaim your turf from rival crews, combat corporate goon squads, and attempt to save the soul of the city. There's multiplayer for 4 players, split screen, and the soundtrack is awesome. It has this techno, electro-like sound with some hip-hop elements to it, and it's definitely a joy to the ears. Except for Birthday Cake. That song, I don't know what's going on with that. Next up, we have Max Payne, the first one. And the first Max Payne was definitely one heck of a game when I first played it years ago. Max Payne was definitely a pain if you played it on the harder difficulties, but I have to say the gameplay and the combat is just so good that you can't help but like it anyway. It has a good story told through comic book style cutscenes, and the overall has a great style to it. I highly recommend giving Max Payne a shot. And when you're done with Max Payne 1, go straight to Max Payne 2 with a deeper story and better gameplay and better graphics. And I highly recommend getting both of them, really. These games are kind of hard to do justice unless you play them. The unique bullet time mechanic for both of these games are really, really well done. And they feel polished. Now, granted, on the original Xbox, they do have some sound issues. But if you play it on the PC, those problems are resolved immediately. Unless Windows 10 has some issues. You might want to get a patch for that, though. First world problems. Moving right along with the next pile, we have Mech Assault 1. If you like mechs and shooting mechs with other mechs, with a bunch of then you'll like this game. The game was one of the first that was advertised highly for Xbox Live. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and put this one up here too. Let's get that one. There we go. How's that? Both Mech Assault games right there. There we go. Now, Mech Assault 1 and 2 are mech games. I wasn't really the biggest fan of the mech genre, except Armored Core was quite awesome. But Mech Assault, for what they are, if you like mech games, are really well done. The multiplayer is huge for these, and even split screen are still a heck of a time. I would love to see another Mech Assault if possible, and put these on the Xbox program. That would be sweet. Medal of Honor Frontline is basically a World War II shooter If you like World War II shooters, this would be one for you. I was never the biggest fan of Medal of Honor. When it comes to World War II games, Return to Castle Wolfenstein beats them out of the water, hands down anyway. But the multiplayer is fun, so if you want to get for like multiplayer, I recommend checking this out. Next up, we have Midnight Club 2, a driving game, a racing game, a driving racing game. Get the idea. The world's most notorious drivers meet each night on the streets of LA, Paris, and Tokyo. Choose from the latest performance-enhanced cars and motorbikes and compete head-to-head to make a name for yourself. Rules? What rules? Drive anywhere in the city, find the fastest route to win, the cops know who you are out there, don't get busted. The multiplayer is in this, and it's really good as usual. Most Rockstar games are actually really well done. Midnight Club 2 is no exception. If you like racing games, this one is very varied and has a lot of content, and I believe anyone who is a fan of racing games would pick up and play this if they haven't already. I'm a big fan of arcade games, and I have Midway Arcade Treasures 2, which comes with most of the violent ones and the other ones. This one contains Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3, Gauntlet 2, Spy Hunter 2, Cyberball 2072, Total Carnage, Pit Fighter, Xenophobia, Wizard of War, Rampage World 2, and Narc. Also, this game also has multiplayer, so if you are a fan of multiplayer arcade games, I highly recommend getting the compilation. If you are a fan of brutally hard action games, then Gaiden will satisfy you. If you are a fan of brutal action games, then Ninja Gaiden will definitely be the one for you. It is very fast paced, it keeps you on your toes, and you basically have to use it's a game that requires a lot of reflexes to play. But it is very fun and very polished. This was a reboot of the original Ninja Gaiden trilogy on the original Nintendo Entertainment System, which was, back then, all we had was an arcade game. Then they came out with the NES trilogy, and then we have a reboot trilogy to go along with it. If you are a fan of Ninja Gaiden already, you probably already played this. Here is an interesting game here. This is called Knightcaster. Knightcaster was definitely one of the earlier titles for the Xbox, and it was a combat magic-like combat game with a semi-open world environment. There's different enemy types and different characters you could choose, and you can zoom in and out the camera. There's a lot of freedom to this, but at the same time, it's very rough around the edges. But since it's pretty cheap, I highly recommend giving this a go. Movie license games are very rarely any good, but Nightmare Before Christmas Oogie's Revenge is one exception. It was made by Capcom of all people. So this is an action game. This action game was actually very well done and very, very polished. You have the ability to change between your three forms: regular Jack Skellington, Santa Jack, and the Pumpkin Jack, Pumpkinhead. It's very surprising how well done it is, and there's even an option where you have to match the rhythm on certain songs straight from the movie. It's actually a very well done game for what it is, and I highly recommend start finding it. It's actually very good. Oddworld Odyssey is the first game in the Oddworld series that went into 3D, and if you are a fan of the Oddworld games, chances are you already played it. Graphics were fantastic for the time, and the gameplay is really good. The puzzles are really good as well, and it's a very entertaining game. A sense of humor, if you're into Oddworld sense of humor, you know exactly what this is like. I was never really a fan of the character Munch, but I feel like the game and the way he was told made up for his personality. I thought the story was very well done, and the cutscenes were some of the best ever. I highly recommend giving this a try. There is an HD version on Steam and the PlayStation 3 as well. Oddworld Stranger's Wrath is different from the original Oddworld games. This one is a first-person shooter, sort of. Also some platforming elements as well. This was actually a really unique game. I quite liked how this was. I liked the tone. I liked the sense of humor. This was one of my personal favorites in the Oddworld franchise, even if it was a departure. A Whopper combo in the mid-2000s, then you had the ability to get a game based off the Burger King characters. I happen to have two on me, Pocket Bike Racer and Sneak King. Pocket Bike Racer is actually kind of a fun racing game for what it is, but the king of the crown, no pun intended, is Sneak King. This game is unintentionally hilarious. The ability to sneak up on people as the Burger King is a sight to behold and is really funny. Games are very cheap. You can find them in bargain bins. I highly recommend you seek them out if you want a laugh or two. Another first-person shooter for you, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Black Arrow. If you're into Rainbow Six, you're definitely gonna like this. You can team up with a friend and take down terrorists in high pressure two-player split-screen missions. And there's 10 new challenging single-player missions, and there's even online multiplayer back when the online multiplayer was. But you can also have split-screen multiplayer as well. So that's always a good thing. So since we mentioned a movie license game that was good, why don't we mention one that's absolutely abysmal? This is Robocop for the Xbox. I have very, very high memories with this game because I am a fan of Robocop. And this game was a pile. This was made by Titus Interactive, the same guys who were responsible for Superman 64. So you kind of have an idea of the quality that you would get into. Gameplay was crap. The graphics were painfully average. The voice acting was some of the hilarious in game. The game was so unfair for all the wrong reasons, and there was no checkpoints. Shenmue II is a sequel to the first Shenmue that was on the Sega Dreamcast. Shenmue II was also on the Sega Dreamcast as well, in Japan only. Shenmue and Shenmue 2 are unique games, as in they were very groundbreaking for the time. The graphics for the time were very well done, and they had combat similar to the Virtua Fighter games. The game's story ended on a cliffhanger, but thankfully we are getting a third installment, apparently coming out in 2018. Let's hope it's good. Since this is October and coming up to Halloween season, I figured a horror game would definitely be something to talk about. Here's Silent Hill 2. Restless Dreams. This was originally made on the PlayStation 2 and then ported to the Xbox with some extra content, and it even ran a little better. Silent Hill 2 has been said to be one of the best in the series, though I prefer the first one in my opinion. But this is definitely a really good scary horror game with an ambient atmosphere. It's definitely a must-have for any horror game, or horror movies, or anything in general. Ambience makes it, man. Simpsons Hit and Run is sort of like a Grand Theft Auto clone, only with Simpsons characters. Go anywhere in the town of Springfield, and there's missions and there's unlockables and different characters you can choose from. Actors from the show. It has multiplayer. It is a blast to play. If you can somehow find a copy of it, I say go check it out. Soul Calibur 2 has a lot of content that people may not care about, but they are there anyway. The multiplayer is a blast and even has an excellent mode for single players called Weapon Master Mode. And it has a good chunk of challenges for you, and you can unlock some stuff as well via the shop in the in-game. Spawn is the exclusive character for the original Xbox version. GameCube got Link from The Legend of Zelda, and the PlayStation 2 got a Tekken character. I can't remember the guy's name, but this is a game that I highly recommend you getting if you like fighting games. If you haven't played this one already, and if you never played a Soul Calibur game, I say start here. People talk about Star Wars Battlefront, that they're usually now talking. People talk about Star Wars Battlefront nowadays, they're now talking about the new games. But back then, I used to play the original Battlefront on the Xbox and on the PlayStation 2. This is what I think of when I think of the Battlefront franchise. This got me into the games. I love playing the heck out of this game. The game had so much content, so many maps, so many ways to play, and multiplayer and a campaign. It was all over the place. Multiplayer was definitely one of the best things about it. When I think of Star Wars RPGs, Knights of the Old Republic is the first that comes to mind. It is 4,000 years before the Galactic Empire, and hundreds of Jedi Knights have fallen in battle against the ruthless Sith. You are the last hope of the Jedi Order. Can you master the awesome power of the Force on your quest to save the Republic? Or will you fall to the lure of the dark side? Hero or villain, savior or conqueror, you alone will determine the destiny of the entire galaxy. BioWare, again, was in charge of the development for this. They later on made the Old Republic, and this was definitely one of the best RPGs for the Xbox, and one of the best Star Wars games out there. This was always a personal favorite of mine. I highly recommend you find a copy of this. Now, say you're a fan of first-person shooters and you like Star Wars, well, Star Wars Republic Commando would definitely be one for you. It is the prelude to Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, for better or worse, and it was definitely one of the best-looking games at the time. It is a proper squad-based first-person shooter. If you have an Xbox or a PC, and you're a fan of Star Wars and first-person shooters, I highly recommend Republic Commando. It's one of the best games that Star Wars universe. Sometimes you just want to be a zombie and eat some brains. So that's what Stubbs the Zombie is all about. It was made by the executive producer of the first Halo game, and it also ran on the Halo engine as well. During the Great Depression, Edward Stubbs Stubblefield was a down-on-his-luck traveling salesman. Now it's 1959 in the world of tomorrow, and he is a zombie with a hunger for human brains. Answer lies buried somewhere in Punchbowl, Pennsylvania, a high-tech city of the future built by the world's richest man. Punchbowl is a paradise of hover cars and helper robots, where crime and pollution simply exist. It's the perfect city, safe, clean, and convenient. Have the last laugh on humanity and indulge your appetite for destruction. You can build a zombie horde, get many zombies to follow you, and take down many other people. You can use your body as a weapon, take off an arm and throw it at somebody. It's really fun how you can play this game. It even has co-op. I highly recommend seeking this game out. This is actually a laugh to play, and even fun to play. This is definitely one of the most unique games I've ever played. There are very few games where you actually play as a zombie, and I feel like we need more of those. This one is a hidden gem at that. If you could somehow get your hands on it, I highly recommend doing so. I think you should play this October. Now, I know some people are into comic books and superheroes, and I know some people are into video games. Here is a Superman game. Superman? No, he doesn't have any good video games. Back up, because Superman Man of Steel is actually not that bad. It's not perfect, but gameplay-wise, it gets the job done better than certain other Superman games. As Superman, you have access to all of his superpowers, including flight, heat vision, and freeze breath. Battle Brainiac, Lex, Luthor, Metallo, Bizarro, Cyborg, and a whole lot of other foes. Engage in ground and aerial battles in Metropolis, the Phantom Zone, and Deep Space. This is actually not a bad game. The camera is a little annoying. I decided to hold up all three of these at once because, hold on. So before Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 came out and was a disappointment to everybody, there was a huge line of successful Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X, Tony Hawk Underground 2, American Wasteland. These are the three I happen to own on the original Xbox. You can't go wrong with either of them. Each game gives you a huge amount of characters and levels, and has some of the best licensed music ever. I am a fan of the first two Tarak games, and when I found out that Tarak is a Tarak game on the original Xbox, I had to go get it. And it's actually very good. The frame rate is a little crappy, but it's actually a very good game. The AI is competent, and it has a huge wide variety of weapons you can use, just like the other games. It may not be as immersive as the other two, or maze-like the other two, but it has a lot of good levels and very good graphics for the time. I didn't really get a chance to play much of the multiplayer in an Unreal Championship, but I did get to play the single-player campaign. And while it was a little short, I thought it was a very, very well done campaign. The only Unreal game I played, but I'm aware of Epic Games' other series, Gears of War, and I would like to hunt down more Unreal Tournament games if possible. And the last game I have on the list is a wrestling game, WWE Raw 2. It has a story mode up to 4 players. If you like wrestling games, this will do it for you. I don't know how I got this, but I have it. There's over 60 WWE superstars, some good gameplay, and some good stuff in this. I'm not really a huge sports games fanatic, but I usually make an exception for wrestling and driving games because I don't know, racing and fighting games are kind of they are a lot more like I understand the appeal more for those than I do like football. Well, that's it, everybody. That was my original Xbox collection. It has been growing off and on for a while. It's not really the hugest collection out of my library, but it's definitely one collection I'm very proud of having. It has so many good games on it and very good exclusives. I highly recommend you find yourself an original Xbox and find some of these games. Some of them are really well done. If you're doing that, I have other stuff I gotta do. So you guys take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys next time.